When my husband left me for a younger woman, I had a choice: let him go or make him wish he never did. I can still feel the coldness of that moment, the phone call I wasn't expecting, yet somehow I had been preparing for. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the faint smell of coffee still lingering in the air, when the ringing phone shattered the quiet. My heart sank as I glanced at the caller ID. It was him, my husband, or rather the man who used to be my husband. I answered and his voice came through, soft, almost apologetic. "I've met someone, and I'm leaving you." His words were clipped, detached. There was no anger, no sadness, just a finality I had never heard in his voice before. "She's younger, more exciting. I'm sorry, but this is happening." The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I could almost hear the silence on the other end of the line as he waited for me to speak. But I couldn't. My mind was racing, memories flashing before my eyes. All those years of laughter, struggles, shared moments, gone, just like that. He didn't even wait for me to respond. "I've already made arrangements. I'm moving in with her." And then he hung up, just like that. The weight of his words hit me, but what stung the most wasn't his departure. No, it was the emptiness that followed, the realization that I had spent years giving everything for a man who could walk away so easily. I had thought I knew him, but in that moment, I saw him for what he truly was: a stranger, cold and calculating. I sat there, the sound of my breath filling the space around me, trying to process what had just happened. But there was something inside me, a calmness, almost like a quiet storm brewing. Because as he stepped into his new life, there was something he didn't know, something I had been planning for weeks. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just the end of a marriage. This was the beginning of something far more satisfying. But first, I had to figure out what to do with the wreckage he'd left behind. I needed time to process, yes. But something told me I was about to take control of this situation and he had no idea what was coming. We were supposed to grow old together, weren't we? That was the plan. When we first met, it felt like we had all the time in the world. Time to build something beautiful, something unbreakable. And for a while, that's exactly what we did. I still remember the first time we moved into this house. Our first house. It was a modest little place, but it felt like a palace. Our wedding was barely 2 years behind us, and we were so full of hope, of promise. The smell of fresh paint and sawdust filled the air as we unpacked boxes in what would become our living room. The floors creaked beneath our feet as we walked, but somehow it felt comforting, like the house was speaking to us, welcoming us in. We took a moment to stand there in silence, holding hands, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is everything. Our love was young, but it was strong. We were full of dreams, full of plans. He would spend hours telling me about the future, about the family we'd raise, about the places we'd go. Every time he talked about it, his eyes would light up with excitement. I wanted to believe in that future with him so badly, to live in the comfort of our shared vision. And so we did. The first few years, everything felt like an adventure. We didn't have much, but we had each other. We spent weekends fixing up the house, working on projects together, hanging shelves, repainting the kitchen, planting flowers in the garden. I remember his face when we picked out the perfect spot for the rose bushes. He smiled, and I could see the pride in his eyes. That was the kind of man he was, someone who found satisfaction in the simple things, who made even the mundane feel special. By the time we were in our 30s, the house had become more than just a home. It had become a reflection of who we were. Every room held memories: our first Christmas tree, the birthday dinners, the countless late-night conversations sprawled out on the couch. I remember the way the kitchen smelled on those weekends when we'd make our favorite meals together. Freshly brewed coffee, the rich scent of bacon sizzling in the pan, and the soft hum of the radio in the background. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. It was perfect. Even as the years passed and the world around us changed, there was always a sense of stability in our home. Our bed, with the familiar creases in the sheets where we both lay every night. The way he'd kiss me goodnight, his rough hands brushing my hair back before he'd whisper, I love you. The sound of the clock ticking on the nightstand. I could never have imagined that one day I would sit in this very room alone, wondering where it all went wrong. But it wasn't just the big moments I cherished. It was the little things that made me believe we had it all figured out. The way he'd leave his shoes by the door every night, the smell of his cologne lingering in the bathroom long after he'd gone, the sound of his voice when he'd call me from work just to check in. "I'm thinking about you," he'd say, and I'd smile, reassured that no matter how busy life got, he was still thinking about me. It was these simple gestures that built the foundation of our life together. They were the glue that held us steady in a world that often felt uncertain. And then there was the house itself. Every corner held a memory. The worn-out sofa where we'd sit and watch movies curled up with blankets. The kitchen table where we'd share dinner, talk about our day, laugh about the silly things. The creaky stairs that I'd grown so used to. His heavy footsteps following behind me, always just a step away. Everything had its place. Everything had a meaning. We had built something real, something I thought could withstand anything. As the years passed, the seasons changed, but the rhythm of our life stayed the same. We'd travel when we could, taking little weekend getaways to the mountains or the beach, always making the most of the time we had together. I remember the first time we went on a road trip, just the two of us. We drove for hours with nothing but the radio playing softly in the background, laughing at nothing and everything. Those were the moments when I felt closest to him, when it was just the two of us against the world. And yet, even as we built this perfect life together, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping in, like an imperceptible shift that I couldn't quite identify. It was subtle at first, small things that didn't add up. He'd come home late from work more often, distracted, tired. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just the stress of life, the responsibilities piling up. But there was something in his eyes, a coldness I couldn't ignore. The warmth was fading slowly but surely. He was still here physically, but the man I had married, the one who made me feel safe, who held my hand through every storm, was slipping away. I could sense the distance growing between us, but I didn't know how to bridge it. I didn't want to believe that the life we had built could be torn apart. After all, it wasn't just a house we had created. It was a family. We had dreams together, shared hopes for the future, for growing old side by side. But I wasn't prepared for the reality of it, the truth that would come crashing down when I least expected it. When he came to me, with those cold words on the phone, it all fell apart. The life we had built, everything, suddenly felt like it had been constructed from glass, fragile and easily shattered. I spent that night in silence, thinking of all the little things that now seemed so insignificant in the face of his betrayal. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I couldn't let him walk away without consequences, and as much as it hurt, I had a decision to make. What would I do with this pain? How would I move forward now that everything had changed? The answer would come soon enough. The first sign was subtle, almost imperceptible, like a small crack in the foundation of a house you've lived in for years. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. It was a Wednesday morning just like any other. The sun was barely up, casting that soft early light through the kitchen window. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the room, and I went about my usual routine, pouring the coffee, making toast, setting the table for two. But this time, something felt off. He came down the stairs like he always did, but there was a hesitation in his step that I couldn't ignore. His usual greeting was a simple, "Good morning, love." He would kiss me on the forehead, his hands warm, and we'd start the day with that comfortable, routine familiarity. But today he only nodded. No kiss, no smile. His face was expressionless. Flat. I handed him his coffee, waiting for the usual banter about how the coffee was either too strong or not strong enough, but he just took the mug and stared at it. The silence between us felt thick, suffocating. His eyes didn't meet mine, and that was the first real crack I noticed. He was physically present, but his mind? His heart? They were miles away. The days that followed weren't much different. He started leaving earlier for work, staying later, and when he came home, he was tired. So tired that he barely had the energy to greet me. I remember one evening I was sitting on the couch folding laundry when he walked through the door. Usually, he'd sit beside me, even if just for a few minutes, and we'd talk about our day. But that night, he walked past me without a word and went straight to the bedroom. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he had a long day. Maybe he was stressed. It was nothing, I told myself. But each time he distanced himself, it chipped away at that feeling of connection we had once shared so effortlessly. It was the little things. His coldness in the way he touched my hand, his absence in the silence of our shared spaces. I found myself reaching out to him, asking, "Is everything okay?" But he'd just wave it off with a half-hearted, "I'm fine." But he wasn't, and deep down, I knew it. I remember one particular night when it all became too clear. We were in the kitchen, and I had asked him about something small, nothing important really, just a question about the grocery list. But when I looked up at him, I saw it, the distance, the coldness in his eyes. It wasn't the warm, familiar gaze that once reassured me that we were a team. It was distant, almost vacant. I froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. My heart skipped a beat. It was like looking at a stranger wearing his face. "Are you sure everything is okay?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, glancing at me quickly before turning back to the refrigerator. "Yeah, just tired, that's all." But something in his tone, it was off, flat, detached, no warmth. That night, I stayed awake longer than usual. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the silence between us. The familiar sound of his breathing beside me, the rhythm I had once found comfort in, now felt foreign. It was in that silence that I realized something wasn't right. The distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. And in that moment, I felt a deep ache in my chest, one I hadn't felt before. I could feel it in the smallest things, like the way he didn't really look at me when he spoke, the way his touch had turned mechanical, as if he was going through the motions without any real connection. It was the first time I had ever felt so alone while lying next to him, but it didn't stop there. As the days passed, the distance between us grew. We stopped going for our usual walks around the neighborhood. Our dinners, once filled with laughter and conversation, became strained, quiet affairs. I'd try to engage him, ask him about his day, but his responses were always short. His eyes rarely left his phone. He'd glance at it constantly, scrolling through messages I couldn't see. The silence between us grew louder, more deafening. One evening, I decided to confront him. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than just stress. I asked him again, this time a little firmer. "What's going on, really?" I needed to know if I was imagining things, if I was overreacting. His face turned pale, as though he had been caught off guard. He avoided my gaze, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "I told you, I'm just tired," he replied, his voice tight, like he was trying to hide something. But I didn't believe him. I could feel the truth sitting between us, heavy and undeniable. It wasn't tiredness, it wasn't stress. Something had shifted, something deep and unspoken. But what was it? What was he hiding from me? I couldn't get any more out of him that night, but his silence spoke volumes. I couldn't understand it. We had been a team, a partnership, for so many years. We shared everything, or so I thought. The next few days were no better. The distance remained cold and suffocating. I found myself second-guessing everything, every word, every touch. I began noticing things I had overlooked before. He started spending more time on his phone, leaving it on the counter, screen face up, as though daring me to look. He wasn't hiding anything physically. He wasn't outright lying, but his actions were telling a different story. There were no more long talks at night, no more quiet moments between us. There was just emptiness. It wasn't until that weekend when I found myself cleaning out his dresser drawer that the truth finally hit me like a slap in the face. I wasn't snooping, it was just routine, a Sunday ritual we had both always done together. But as I pulled open the drawer to grab his shirts, I saw it, his phone lying there. It wasn't turned off, like usual. This time the screen was lit up with a message notification. "Hey babe, miss you. Can't wait to see you tomorrow." My heart stopped. I knew immediately. There was no mistake. He was seeing someone else. And it wasn't just anyone. It was someone younger. In that moment, everything clicked into place. The coldness, the distance, the subtle signs, it all led to this one painful truth. But now that I knew, what was I supposed to do with it? How would I confront him? How would I even begin to process the betrayal? The answer was clear. I couldn't let him get away with this. I knew the truth before he even said a word, but when he finally did, it hit me harder than I expected. It was the kind of truth that shatters everything you thought you knew about someone. It was a Wednesday night, the same as any other. He came home late as usual. No apology, no explanation. The front door creaked as he stepped inside, and for a moment the house felt different. I could hear the click of his shoes on the hardwood floor, but somehow it sounded emptier, more distant. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the dim light from the overhead lamp casting shadows on the walls. A cup of tea sat in front of me, untouched. I hadn't been able to drink much lately, the knot in my stomach tightening with every passing day. He walked in, his eyes avoiding mine, but I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. He set his keys down on the counter, his movements stiff, as if he knew what was coming. I could feel the tension rising between us. There was no need for me to ask anymore. I wasn't going to pretend that I didn't already know. "Is there something you want to tell me?" I said, my voice steady but trembling underneath, like a thin sheet of ice about to crack. For a moment, he didn't answer. He just stood there looking at the ground, his fingers tapping nervously against the counter. Then, in a soft voice, he spoke. The words that would change everything. "I'm in love with someone else," he said, his gaze still averted. "Her name's Rachel. She's younger, and I think I want to be with her." It felt like the air left the room in an instant, the silence pressing in around me. His confession hung there, like an anchor sinking deeper into my chest. He was still talking, but I wasn't really hearing him anymore. I was hearing the sound of my own heartbeat, thudding in my ears, loud and unforgiving. I felt numb, like I was watching this happen to someone else. How could this be my life? How could the man I had spent over 20 years with, the man who had promised to love me through everything, betray me in such a cold, calculated way? I blinked hard, trying to bring myself back to the moment. He was still talking, telling me how he never meant to hurt me, how he didn't know how to handle the situation, how this had been building for a while. But none of it mattered. Nothing he said could erase the truth. He wanted out. He wanted her. And the worst part? He still couldn't look me in the eye. I felt my hands tighten around the edge of the table, the nails digging into the wood. I should have seen it coming. I had ignored the signs for so long. His late nights, his detachment, his strange phone habits. I had convinced myself it was just stress, that he was tired, that it would pass. But it hadn't. And now I had to face the fact that the life we built, the love I thought we shared, had meant nothing to him in the end. He took a deep breath, like he was preparing himself for what was coming next. "I know this is hard for you," he said, "but I need you to understand. This is something I have to do." I wanted to scream at him, to call him every name under the sun. I wanted to tell him that he had destroyed everything, that he was tearing apart the family we had worked so hard to build. But I didn't. I didn't speak. I just sat there, looking at him as if I was seeing him for the first time. I felt like a stranger was sitting across from me. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted him so completely when he had already made his decision long before tonight? He didn't wait for me to respond. He never did. Instead, he moved to leave, but I stopped him with a single word. "Wait." It was the only word I could manage to choke out. I wasn't sure what I was going to say next, but I couldn't just let him walk away like this, without facing what he had done. He paused, but didn't turn around. "What?" he asked, his voice tired. I stood up from the table, my legs shaky, my mind still trying to process the reality of the situation. I wanted to say something, anything, but all that came out was a simple question. "Do you love her?" He turned slowly, his eyes finally meeting mine, and for the first time in weeks I saw something real. It wasn't guilt, or regret, or even sorrow. It was something else, something I hadn't expected. Yeah, he said, almost too quickly, as if it had been waiting to escape. I do. I really do. That was all I needed to hear. I stood there, staring at him, trying to understand how everything could change so quickly. One moment, we were planning our future. The next, he was walking away, leaving me with nothing but shattered memories and broken promises. I didn't cry. Not yet. I couldn't. Instead, I felt this strange sense of calm wash over me, as if a part of me had already known this was coming, as if I had been preparing for it without even realizing it. He walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, and for a moment, I just stood there, frozen, listening to the sound of him leaving. The truth had come out. The man I loved had made his choice, and there was no going back. But as the silence settled in, I realized something. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about what I would do next. And that's when I knew. I couldn't let him go without consequences. I had a choice to make. In that moment, with the weight of his confession hanging in the air, I knew my life was about to change forever. But what I didn't know was how it would change, or what kind of woman I would become in the aftermath. The silence in the room stretched on, a suffocating presence that made every breath feel like a struggle. I had spent so many years building my world around him, around us, and now suddenly it was collapsing before my eyes. The pieces of our life, the shared dreams and plans, felt like they were slipping through my fingers like sand. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. His words had left me frozen in time. The betrayal was too sharp, too raw. My mind was a whirlwind, a storm of thoughts crashing against each other. The first thing that hit me was a wave of disbelief. Was this really happening? How could he throw away everything we built for someone else? Someone younger, someone new. How could he look me in the eye and say that he didn't love me the way he once did? But then, just as quickly, a quiet anger started to creep in. Not the explosive kind that comes with screaming and fighting, but the kind that builds slowly, quietly, until it consumes you from the inside. This wasn't just about losing him. This was about losing myself, my dignity, my sense of worth. And I wasn't ready to let that happen, not without a fight. I stood there staring at him, the man I had spent more than 2 decades with, the man I had trusted more than anyone, was now a stranger in my eyes. His face was etched with regret, but there was something in his eyes, a coldness, a finality, that made my blood run cold. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry he had to break it to me. "Are you going to leave now?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. I needed to hear him say it. I needed to hear him make it real. He looked at me, his face softening just a bit, but his gaze was distant. "I don't know. I... I just need some space. I need time to figure things out." Space. How many times had we said we needed space over the years? But I never imagined it would be the space between us that would make the most distance. Space? I repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a poison. "You've already made your decision, haven't you?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine. But it didn't matter anymore. He had already chosen. The look on his face said it all. He was done. I felt a flicker of something deep inside me, a fire I hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was anger, or maybe it was something stronger, the realization that I had been living in his shadow for too long, that I had been allowing his choices to define my own. But whatever it was, it sparked something inside me, something I hadn't known I was capable of. I turned my back to him, unable to look at him any longer. If he was going to walk away, I wasn't going to let him see me crumble. I moved toward the window, my hands trembling as I looked out at the familiar view of our backyard. The trees we planted together, the swing where we used to sit on lazy summer afternoons. It was all here. But the future I had imagined for us had just evaporated, like morning fog lifting in the light. For a moment, I wanted to call it all off. I wanted to beg him to stay, to tell him that we could work through it, that maybe this was just a phase. But deep down, I knew I couldn't go back. Not after this. Not after he had thrown everything away so easily. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision that was about to come crashing down on me. I could feel it in my bones, the pain, the loss, the uncertainty. But I also felt something else, a sense of power. I wasn't going to beg him to stay. I wasn't going to be the woman he thought I was, the woman he could walk all over and then come back to when it was convenient for him. No, I had a choice to make, and it was time to take control of my own life. I turned around to face him, my voice surprisingly calm. "You can go, but don't come back to me. Not like this." He blinked, clearly taken aback. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm done," I said firmly, walking toward him. "You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. I'm not going to sit here and let you destroy me. I'm stronger than that." The words came out almost in a whisper, but I felt them deep in my soul. I didn't need him to stay. I didn't need him to fix this. What I needed was to fix myself, to reclaim the parts of me that had been lost over the years. The woman who was strong, independent, capable. I didn't need him to define my worth anymore. He opened his mouth to say something, but I held up my hand, stopping him. "Don't say anything, just leave. It's over." For a moment, he just stood there looking at me. I saw the regret in his eyes again, but I didn't feel sympathy. I had given him all of me for too long. He didn't deserve my sympathy. He turned and walked out the door, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the house. I didn't turn to watch him go. Instead, I stood there, my back to the door, letting the silence settle over me. I had made the decision, and even though my heart was breaking, I knew it was the right one. Now that I had made my choice, I couldn't just sit here and wait for my life to rebuild itself. I had to take action, to make something new out of the pieces he'd left behind. The question was, what would I do next, and how would I get through the days that followed? I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to be the victim. The moment he walked out that door, something inside me shifted. The anger, the pain, it was all still there, but now it was wrapped in something else. A quiet, burning resolve. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had control of the situation, and I wasn't going to waste it. I knew I had to act carefully. I couldn't just confront him again or run to the lawyers right away. No, I needed to be strategic. It was time to play the game, but this time, I was the one who would set the rules. I spent the next few days in a haze. I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't scream. Instead, I did what he never expected. I started planning. Planning not just for my future, but for the consequences of his actions. The house felt strangely quiet without him. I found myself walking through the rooms, touching the things he had left behind. His shoes by the door, his jacket draped over the back of the chair. But I didn't feel sadness anymore. I felt something stronger, an urge to make him feel the weight of his choices, to show him that I wasn't someone to be discarded so easily. I started gathering information. Quietly, carefully. No one knew what I was doing, not even my closest friends. At first, it was small things. I dug out old financial documents from the drawer, things I hadn't paid attention to in years. Tax returns, mortgage papers, insurance policies. He never asked me to handle any of it, and I'd let him take the lead for so long. But now, I was going to understand everything. I needed to know exactly what I was working with. I spent hours on the phone, calling the bank, getting copies of everything I could. I wasn't doing anything illegal, just quietly gathering what belonged to me. I even called his lawyer, under the guise of wanting to make sure I understood what would happen next. The whole time, I acted like nothing had changed, but it had, and I was no longer the woman who would sit by while my life was ripped apart. I was a woman with a plan. The more I dug, the more I discovered. There were accounts I didn't know about, savings, investments, properties, things he had hidden from me for years. My stomach twisted as I realized how much he had kept from me, how much he had taken for granted. But I didn't feel angry anymore. No, this was the moment I'd been waiting for. I started to piece it together. He thought he could just walk away from me, from everything we'd built. But he hadn't realized the one thing he had underestimated. Me. He had made a mistake by thinking I wouldn't fight back, by thinking I wouldn't go to whatever lengths necessary to make sure his betrayal didn't go unpunished. But I wasn't going to go after him directly, not yet. He needed to feel the consequences of his actions first, without even knowing I was the one pulling the strings. I wasn't going to be like him. I wasn't going to tear him down the way he had done to me. No, my revenge would be something much more satisfying, something that would hit him when he least expected it. One afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table, the papers spread out before me. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's pressing in on you. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. I wasn't calling anyone I knew. I was calling someone who could help me with the next step. A private investigator. I had no illusions. I knew he was already gone, already set on his new life with her. But this wasn't about stopping him. This was about making sure he couldn't move on without facing what he had done, without understanding the mess he had created. I kept the conversation brief. I need you to find out everything about him, everything he's done, everything he's hiding. I don't care what it takes. The investigator was cautious at first, but my tone was firm. I wasn't asking for help. I was telling him what needed to be done. I could hear the small, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. But he agreed, and that was all I needed. I wasn't going to rush this. No, I had time on my side. He thought he had everything figured out, that his new life would just fall into place. But I knew better. His new life wasn't going to be as perfect as he thought. It was going to come with consequences, consequences that would follow him whether he wanted them to or not. And slowly, ever so quietly, I started to make it happen. I made a few calls, checked a few more records, and then I waited. I waited for him to slip, to make a mistake. Because he would. I knew he would. Everyone always does. But I wasn't going to leave it to chance. I knew I needed to take things further, to be sure that when his world started to unravel, I would be the one holding the threads, the next move. It was time to start putting things into motion, to ensure that everything he had worked for would slowly slip through his fingers. The moment I decided to act, everything changed. The quiet resolve I had nurtured in the days following his betrayal began to grow into something far more powerful. Now, it wasn't just about reclaiming my life. It was about making him understand that there were consequences to his actions. I'd spent enough time feeling powerless. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this unscathed, thinking he could just erase me from his life like a bad memory. No, he needed to feel the weight of what he had done, and I was going to be the one to make him feel it. The first part of my plan was simple. I had to hit him where it would hurt the most, his new life. He thought he was starting fresh, that his new world would be easy and full of possibilities. But he hadn't counted on me, or on how far I was willing to go to make sure his new life wasn't as perfect as he imagined. I knew that if I wanted to destroy his sense of security, I had to move carefully. I wasn't going to make it obvious that I was behind any of this. No, I needed to keep the strings pulled tight in the background, while everything around him slowly started to unravel. One evening, I found myself at the computer again, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I searched through records, pulling up everything I could find about his investments. It wasn't the first time I'd looked into his finances, but this time, I wasn't just snooping. I was taking action. I scrolled through property records, stock portfolios, even old tax documents. He'd left me with nothing but scraps, and I was going to make sure those scraps became his downfall. I focused on the apartment building he had invested in, the one where he and Rachel were living. It wasn't just a simple apartment, it was a complex business venture he had been working on for years. And now it was the perfect leverage. I knew the building was part of a deal with some very ambitious developers who had their eye on a new project in the city. What they didn't know, however, was that the papers were flawed. The deed was filled with discrepancies, legal loopholes, and clauses that made it easy for me to attack. I spent the next few days working with my lawyer, meticulously going through every contract, every detail. We found several areas that could be contested in court, but what mattered most was the fact that the building wasn't as solid as it seemed. It was just waiting for someone to come along and shine a light on its cracks. But this wasn't the only thing I had in mind. I wasn't going to just take the building down. No, I needed to hit him where he could feel it, in his wallet. I knew he'd been scrambling to cover some debts, using Rachel's money, using his own to hold it all together. but I was going to make sure those debts started spiraling out of control. I called in a few favors, reached out to a financial advisor I knew, someone who could track down hidden assets, and began subtly maneuvering to tie up his financial situation in knots. Little things at first, small changes in his credit profile, bills that were left unpaid for just long enough to cause a ripple. Then I started putting pressure on his investors, reminding them of the deals he'd made that had become questionable. But it wasn't all about money. I needed him to feel the consequences on a personal level. I had to make him realize that the life he had chosen to live, without me, wasn't going to be as easy as he thought. I reached out to his old friends, the ones he had pushed away when he became too busy with his new life. I started dropping subtle hints here and there, little stories about how he had ignored his responsibilities, how he had made decisions without consulting anyone, leaving people in the dust. His reputation had always been important to him, and now I was going to make sure it started to tarnish. The first call came in on a Wednesday morning. It was his lawyer, his voice cold and businesslike. "I've been informed there's an issue with the apartment building you're involved with. We'll need to have a discussion soon about next steps." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. This was it. I knew he'd be sweating bullets the moment the news hit him. But I didn't stop there. I made sure to send a few more calls in his direction, keeping the pressure on him, keeping him on his toes. Every time the phone rang, I knew I was getting closer. Every time his stress levels rose, I felt a small sense of satisfaction. He hadn't believed I would fight back. He hadn't believed I would go this far, but I was just getting started. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the apartment building. The lawyers had come back with the news that the sale was questionable. I was ready to file the paperwork, to put the legal wheels in motion that would drag his name through the mud. It wasn't just about the building, though. It was about making him realize that everything he had done, everything he thought he could take with him, was now in jeopardy. I could feel the weight of the payback building like the storm before the rain. And the best part? He had no idea it was me behind it all. But I wasn't going to stop until I had control over everything. The apartment was just the beginning. The next move? It was time to take back what was mine, and I had a feeling that sooner or later he'd come to realize exactly who was behind it all. The day he came back, I knew it was time. He had no idea what was coming, but I did. He walked through that door like everything was normal, like the past few weeks hadn't happened, like everything hadn't changed. But I could see it in his eyes. He had that nervous energy, the hesitation in his step, and I knew he felt it too. He opened his mouth to say something, but I stopped him before he could. "Sit down," I said, my voice calm but firm. The words were simple, but they carried weight. I wasn't going to let him dance around this anymore. I watched him sink into the chair across from me, his face flushed, his hands clenched. There was a nervousness in his posture that I hadn't seen before. He was still trying to hold on to his sense of control, but I could feel his composure slipping. He was already on edge, already wondering what had happened, what had changed. "I know what you did," I said, not bothering to sugarcoat it. The truth hung heavy between us. His eyes flickered, darting around the room, avoiding mine. "I didn't," he began, but I cut him off. "Yes, you did," I replied, my tone steady. "You walked away from me, from everything we built together. You made a choice, and I'm done pretending I didn't see it." The words came out without emotion, but underneath there was something else. Something raw and angry that I'd been holding back for too long. It was the same anger that had fueled me to take control of my life, to make sure he knew exactly how much I had been hurt. He shifted in his seat, his face paling. He opened his mouth again, trying to find the right words, but I didn't need to hear him anymore. The silence between us grew thick, and for a moment, I could feel the weight of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the hurt. "I know you think I'm just going to sit here and accept it," I continued, my voice quieter now but full of resolve. "That I'll just let you walk away without a second thought. But you've got another thing coming." He looked at me now, really looked at me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw something in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or fear. He knew I wasn't the same woman I had been. He knew I had changed. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said softly, almost as though he was trying to convince himself. Didn't you? I asked, the bitterness in my voice creeping in. Because it sure feels like you did. It sure feels like you made your choice long before you told me. He let out a long sigh, his shoulders slumping. I never wanted to hurt you, but I wasn't happy. The words felt hollow. I had heard them too many times before. People use unhappiness as an excuse for selfishness, for tearing apart lives without any regard for the consequences, but I wasn't going to give him that out. You weren't happy? I repeated, my voice hard now. You weren't happy while we were building a life together? You weren't happy when we made plans for the future? You weren't happy when we held hands through all the hard times? His gaze dropped to the floor, unable to meet my eyes. He knew. Deep down, he knew he had no defense. He had walked away from everything I had given him, and now, standing here, I was taking back what was mine. You made a mistake, I said, leaning forward slightly. But here's the thing, I'm not going to let you destroy me. He stared at me in silence, his mouth working as if he was going to say something, but nothing came out. I could feel his desperation, but I wasn't about to show him any mercy. Not anymore. This isn't about revenge, I continued, my voice cold now. It's about accountability. You can't just walk away and leave me to pick up the pieces. You will face the consequences of what you've done, and I'm going to make sure of it. His face shifted then, the color draining from his cheeks. What are you talking about? You'll see, I said, my lips curling into a faint smile. But you're not going to like it. The air between us was thick with tension. His mind was racing, I could tell. He was trying to figure out what I meant, what I was going to do, but I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. The truth was, I had already started. He just didn't know it yet. He finally stood up, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape. I don't know what you're trying to do, but I didn't come here for this. I came to talk about the next steps. I'm sorry, but I'm done here. I watched him turn, his back to me, and for a second, I thought he might just leave, and part of me wanted him to. Part of me wanted to never see his face again. But the other part, the part that had spent far too long waiting in silence, knew that this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. I stood up slowly, my feet feeling heavy on the ground, but I didn't move toward him. Instead, I looked at him, really looked at him, and said, I'm not the woman you left behind. Don't forget that. He didn't turn around. He just walked out, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. But even though he was gone, the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. I had to make sure that when everything was said and done, he would never forget the choice he had made. The next step? I wasn't done yet. I still had a few moves left. The door clicked shut behind him, and for a long moment I stood there, unable to move. It wasn't the slam of the door that made my heart race. It was the quiet after, the silence that followed his departure. Suddenly the house felt emptier than it ever had before. I could still smell his cologne in the air, still see the indent of his shoes on the rug by the door, but there was no warmth in it anymore, no comfort. I took a deep breath, the coldness of the room settling into my bones. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the cup of tea I'd forgotten about on the counter. The hot steam rising from the mug did little to warm the chill I felt inside. The anger had subsided. The fury, the rush of adrenaline, it was gone. Now I was left with something else, a deep, gnawing emptiness that made me question everything. The hours after he left were the hardest. There was no catharsis in his exit, no sense of relief. It was as if the finality of it had sunk in too deeply. I found myself walking through the house, my eyes lingering on the things that had once felt like symbols of our life together. The old sofa we bought on a whim at a flea market, the kitchen table where we shared our best moments. I ran my fingers over the worn-out edges of the furniture, trying to find some comfort in the familiar. But it wasn't the same anymore. Nothing was the same. I could hear the sounds of the world continuing outside, the hum of cars passing by, the distant laughter of children playing in the street. But inside, it was all too quiet, too still. The world outside had moved on, but I felt stuck in the aftershock of his departure. My life was now divided into two halves, before he left and after. The first few days after he walked out were the hardest. I didn't cry, not at first. Instead, I stayed busy, cleaning, organizing, anything to keep my mind from dwelling too much on the wreckage of what had just happened. But the thoughts crept in, slow and insidious. What would my life look like now? How would I rebuild? But I didn't have time to linger on those questions, not yet. I had made a decision when he left. I was not going to let this break me. I was not going to fall into despair and self-pity. The woman I was before him was still in there. Somewhere beneath the hurt, beneath the disappointment, she was still there, and she would be the one to get me through this. The first week was a blur. I avoided friends, avoided phone calls. I didn't want anyone's pity. I didn't want to hear their "I'm sorry" or their "he didn't deserve you." I just wanted space, time, to figure out how to handle this new reality. But as the days dragged on, I started to realize something. There was something deeper here, something I hadn't accounted for. I couldn't just walk away from this situation, from the life we had built. I couldn't just keep going as if nothing had happened. I needed closure. I needed to understand how I had gotten to this point. So I began looking deeper. I started organizing the papers I had gathered about his investments, his financials, all the things I had meticulously researched over the past few weeks. There were cracks, flaws in his financial foundation, but they weren't just about the money. I realized the betrayal wasn't just about his affair. It was about how little I knew, how little I had paid attention to the things that mattered. His lies, his secrets, the things he kept from me all those years, they were now all out in the open. But instead of feeling anger, I felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, the truth was on the table. Finally, the things I had ignored were now impossible to ignore. But then came the quiet moments. The moments when the house was too still, when the weight of the silence threatened to crush me. I would walk through the rooms, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness, and remember the life we had shared. The good times, the laughter, the promises. They felt like they belonged to someone else now, someone who wasn't me. I sat in the chair by the window that he used to sit in, staring out at the garden we had planted together. The flowers were in full bloom, the roses I'd watered just the way he liked them. I had spent hours tending to that garden, and now it felt like a metaphor for everything he had left behind. That's when it hit me, the moment of clarity. The decision he had made was his, but how I responded was mine. I had the power now. I had the choice. I could wallow in the pain, let myself be consumed by the anger and the loss. Or I could take this as the opportunity I had been waiting for, the chance to reclaim my life, to start fresh. I could rewrite my own story, but it wasn't going to be easy. The reality was that everything was different now. The life I had known was gone. And for a while, I didn't know who I was without him. But I also knew one thing. I was not going to let him define me. He had made his choice. Now, it was time for me to make mine. It wasn't just about moving on anymore. It was about rebuilding, about taking back the power I had lost. And I wasn't going to do it alone. I had a plan, and I was going to see it through, no matter what. The next step was clear. It was time to take control of my future. The hardest part wasn't letting him go. It wasn't facing the pain of his betrayal, or even the harsh reality of our broken marriage. No, the hardest part was deciding that I was enough on my own. That my worth wasn't tied to the life we had shared, or to the man who had walked away from it all. It took me a long time to realize that I could be whole without him, and when that realization finally came, it was like a weight lifting off my chest. It's strange how something that feels so heavy, so overwhelming can suddenly seem so light, as if the world that once felt crushing now felt wide open. The house, the space he left behind, no longer felt like a place filled with ghosts of what could have been. Instead, it felt like my space. I remember one morning waking up earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to peek through the curtains, casting a soft golden glow over the room. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the sting of his absence. I didn't feel the suffocating pressure of trying to hold everything together. It was just me. I stood by the window, looking out at the garden we had tended to together. The flowers were blooming, vibrant, colorful, unapologetically alive. The roses I had planted now stretched tall toward the sky, as if reminding me of something important. Growth comes from the hardest moments. I had grown. The thought of rebuilding wasn't so daunting anymore. The first step was the hardest, yes, but once I realized I didn't need anyone to tell me I was capable, I started doing things on my own. I rearranged the furniture in the living room, something we had both put off for years. Every small change, every decision that had once been shared between us, was now a reflection of who I was becoming. Strong, independent, and unafraid to take control of my own story. I started taking classes, something I had put off for far too long. I spent weekends at the local art gallery, taking in the colors, the stories told through paint and sculpture, and I found peace in those spaces. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, people I had neglected because I had been so focused on him and the life we had tried to build. I surrounded myself with people who lifted me up, people who reminded me of the woman I had always been underneath it all. I got my finances in order, really in order. I hired a financial advisor to help me track the investments I had made, the things I'd been too afraid to take charge of before. And when I looked at my accounts, I was proud of what I had accomplished on my own. He had never believed in me the way I needed him to, but it didn't matter anymore. I believed in myself now. I began traveling too, little trips here and there to places I'd always wanted to see but never made the time for. I remember one afternoon in a small cafe by the coast, the salty air mingling with the scent of fresh pastries. The sun was setting over the water, casting the most beautiful shade of pink and purple across the sky. It hit me then. This was what I had been missing all along: freedom. The kind you can only find when you stop holding on to the past and start embracing the possibilities of the future. One evening, as I sat on the porch of the house he had once shared with me, I found myself smiling. It wasn't the kind of smile that hides pain or regret. It wasn't a smile born from a place of bitterness or revenge. It was a smile born from peace. Peace that I had fought for. Peace that I had earned. I had made the choice to reclaim my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me again. The journey wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of everything I had been through felt like it might crush me, but I came out stronger for it. And now, as I look forward, I know one thing for sure. My life is my own, and no matter what comes next, I'll face it on my terms.